Everyone, welcome to APF at Home, sponsored by the Trust. The Trust support of this series allows us in these really unprecedented times to stay connected to you who have been so generous in supporting our work at the American Psychological Foundation. I'm Tony Jackson, and I'm a very proud member of the board of the APF for over a decade now, and I'll be your moderator for today's program. As many of you know, the American Psychological Foundation, APF, is the premier private grant-making foundation in psychology. APF provides almost $1 million annually in grants and awards, and our goal is to use the power of psychology to create social change. Our grants are always relevant, and never more so now in these uncertain times of stress and hardship, and some might say awakening as well. We have, for example, recently announced 2 COVID-19 rapid response grants to Dr. Jonathan Comer and to Dr. Tanisha Hill-Jarrett. And APF has also recently launched the Envision Ending Racism campaign to increase the number of grants we make specifically to enable psychologists to explore cognitive and behavioral parameters that motivate racist feelings and behaviors. APF is unique in that it receives the overwhelming majority of our support from folks like you around the country and the world, about 95% from individuals. We're grateful to all of you for participating in this webinar and for your continued support, and we'll hope that you'll consider reaffirming your support so we can do even more. And I'm also going to ask my colleagues at APF Central, as it were, to put in the chat box the link to the Envision Ending Racism Fund, which we'll hope you'll also consider because of the special opportunity that provides. Well, today I have the distinct honor and privilege to facilitate a conversation with Dr. William Cross, the 2020 recipient of APF's Gold Medal Award for Life Achievement in the Application of Psychology. And I say facilitate a conversation because I'm going to seize upon the opportunity to ask my questions of Dr. Cross, but I do want to engage, if it's at all possible, you who are watching as much as possible as well. So please know that you can submit questions via the chat box at the bottom of your screen at any time during the conversation, and I'll try to work them in as we go along. But I'll also make sure to leave at least 10 minutes at the very end of our session for your questions. Now, Dr. William Cross is one of America's leading theorists and researchers on Black identity development in particular, and on racial ethnic identity development in general. Coming of age in the Black consciousness movement of the 1960s and the 1970s, he constructed the negrescence theory to explain the identity change process linked to social movement dynamics. His text, Shades of Black, published in 1991, is a classic in the field, voicing a deeply thoughtful and persuasive challenge to the Black self-hatred thesis that had previously dominated the field. The Cross model of identity development has become a template for scholars fashioning similar models on Native American identity, women's identity, gay lesbian identity, and Asian American identity. After completing his doctorate at Princeton, his distinguished career has included a 20-year appointment in the African Studies and Research Center at Cornell, where he said he entered as a psychologist, but after 20 years of immersion in interdisciplinary Black studies, he left the Africana Center, transformed into a cultural psychologist. Dr. Cross left Cornell for the University of Pennsylvania in 1994, where he assembled a research group that experimentally tested and validated the cross-racial identity scale, which has become one of the most widely used social identity measures. In later years, he's had appointments at the Graduate Center, University of New York, and at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And he's currently retired, sort of, but living in Denver, Colorado. He's received any number of prestigious awards, and now we are exceptionally pleased to be able to add to that list the APF Gold Medal Award for Life Achievement in the Application of Psychology. So Dr. Cross, welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
I think you may need to turn your video back on.
Hold on.
Yeah. Yeah, let me just.
It should be on.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, maybe it was my computer, but anyway. Dr. Cross, very, very happy to see you. So much. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Let me start with this question.
I should say I knew this was going to be important because when I was in the shower, I heard my late mother's voice telling me to be sure to clean my ears, even though they're not going to be prominent in this vision.
Yeah, no, well.
So I'm all set.
Great, fantastic, yeah. Dr. Cross, you recently written a memoir of sorts called Black Identity from a Barber's Chair.
Yes.
It hasn't been published yet, but I, for one, am very excited about having the opportunity to read it when it is. But I think, or at least I hope, that in that you're going to be recapping some of the big ideas you've advanced in psychology, including, of course, the groundbreaking work on digressance theory. And of course, the Gold Medal Award spotlights your very distinguished career in psychology.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, that's a little different.
A little excitement.
Oh, okay. So what I'm trying to get at here is I wonder if we could start by asking you to look back on your career and tell us what are the intellectual contributions to psychology and to the broader public discourse on race and culture that you would like to be known for? What goes into the Bill Cross intellectual highlight reel?
Thank you. In some ways, it hasn't changed in that we still are wrestling with the image, the public image of African Americans, especially for working class African Americans. In the book, I like to think I pretty much destroy the origins of the deficit perspective. I pretty much show it is a myth making rather than fact. And I'm hoping when the book is received in that fashion, that in a sense, I can't tell you how many graduate students have come to me with the notion of research, and their starting point was the proposition that there's something wrong with Black people.
Mm.
And so it's almost like there must be something wrong. There's even the notion that slavery had to in some way permanently damage us. And that cuts off discourse. So for example, the first 12 years out after Emancipation, we made tremendous strides in education and business and farming and so on. And it was made by people who were raised in slavery. Therefore, the strengths that they were showing as adults can only be explained from a developmental psychological point of view by revisiting how they were raised in slavery by slaves. So when you take, that's what I'm aiming at in the book, is to chop down the logic of the deficit and even introduce the notion that we were able to fashion an ecology of positive human development, despite the fact that we were living in a form of hell. I went back and read my work this morning, and I'm just hoping people receive it in that fashion. And then the other thing I've tried to do is to remind us as Black people that we are born first and foremost human beings. Therefore, we have all the tools and resources and the tendencies of other human beings. And that we have a tendency to be so excited about becoming Black, which I am a part of that excitement, that we become intolerant of our diversity. And yet you cannot have a group of people without having diversity. And so I've worked very strong in the book to fashion a discussion where we are Black, but where we are human. And of course, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, something that I did not adjust as openly as I would have liked in the past, I bring in gender as well. So I would start there.
Interesting. You know, one of the
sorry, I'll add one more.
Carry on. Go
Sorry.
on.
We have underestimated the effect of poverty on our development. And we sometimes will talk about poverty, but then we miss the link. It's poverty related to unemployment. So when other groups have experienced poverty, such as Jews, Italians, and so on, we almost take for granted that they turned to the streets and developed gangsterism. So in Detroit, the Purple Gang was a Jewish gang, okay? And we almost have no way to understand that. And so a lot of the stuff that's happening in our communities, especially at the working class level with young people, they have turned to the streets, but that's not a unique experience. Again, if we understand how other human beings negotiated poverty during their time, then in a sense, it makes less dramatic some of our, I'm not trying to give an apology for criminality, it's not my point. But if you don't have opportunity, if you have people who are bright and energetic and capable, and yet the society doesn't provide an outlet for those skills, then young people will turn and have turned to the street. It's another way of backing off a very deficit perspective on what happens to our teenagers and so on.
Interesting, very interesting. I want to take up for a second what I think you're also quite well known for, and that is, in effect, the other side of sort of dismantling the negative conceptualization of Black people, and that is the negressence theory, which really begins to sort of illuminate kind of a more how Black folk get to a more positive view.
Yeah.
And one of the central tenets of the negressence theory is the notion that in the development of Black racial and cultural identity, there's a period where Black individuals go from sort of pre-encounter, where the salience of race is not as at top of mind, let's say, or is not as critical to the construction of identity as it is to post-encounter, or that they go through an encounter with a series of events or an event that really sort of forces us to understand our Blackness and to deal with it in terms of our own identity. I want to ask you about that from a couple of different perspectives. One, a developmental perspective, and another from kind of a contemporary situation perspective. And to get to the first part, I want to say a little my own story, as it were, or a story about something that happened in my past. When my daughter was 5 years old, I remember we were in the checkout line of a store in, I think it was White Plains, New York, and just out of the blue, she was 5 years old. She says to me, "Daddy, why are we Black?" And I said, well, and it was interesting too, because behind me in line, there was this older African-American gentleman who I could almost hear him thinking, "No, how's this brother going to answer that question?" But what I said to her, I just said, "Well, to your question of why we're Black," I said, "Because we're lucky." And that sort of began a conversation about race with her that really has persisted to this day. But what always stuck with me is like, where was that question coming from? So in relation to negressence theory, which I think seems to focus more on identity development from kind of adolescence onward, would the theory suggest that even at 5, she was moving from a pre-encounter to an encounter stage, and that there had been some psychological shock to her system that caused her to pose that question? Or are there different developmental pathways to a positive Black identity that doesn't necessarily require that sort of eye-opening encounter, if you will?
If you were raised by your parents to make being Black kind of a normative thing, then in a sense it takes away from the drama that may occur later in life. The answer is yes. There's ways in which at an early age, you and your interaction with your child can prepare them. Remember, we're not born into the category. That is to say, the category has no meaning. We're not hardwired, if you will, to be gay, to be Black, to be Jewish. We become those things because it's a social category. And it's scripted sometimes by people within our own group, but in terms of power relationships, it's scripted by people who are not a part of our group. And so there's a way in which we have to figure out a way to understand all that. That's what Du Bois meant by two-ness, and which I stress heavily in one of the chapters of the book, that there's a sense of my experiencing myself in the here and now, and then I'm given an award for a part of what I do. But it doesn't take away from me in the here and now. And we have to wrestle with that. It's really odd when you encounter someone who hates you, who doesn't know you. It's wow, you almost feel like, where did that come from? And when it's organized, as in the society, so that there actually are signs that say no color, no this, no that, no Jews. I mean, and in a sense, it offends the way your mother and your father and your sisters have raised you, and you can't escape it. You have to negotiate it. And although some people would argue we deal with some of these things at a young age, for the most part, we're more equipped in late adolescence and adulthood to reflect on it, because it requires a kind of fast interaction between yourself, your non-self, and others. And that's why it's so critical in the evolution of a sense of meaning making between 15 and say 25. Remember, our brain doesn't really totally mature until we're 25. And so we need all the facility of that to kind of make sure the insanity of racism means.
Mm. And I think you've also said that that process of sort of meaning making and identity formation isn't a one-time encounter. It is a continuous process over time.
Yeah, in fact, Tommy Parham actually gave it a label. He calls it recycling. Hmm. He suggests that, we become grounded in a way. So I came up in the 70s. I was in not the first line of Black scholars in Black studies, but I was close to that. And there was a way in which we gave no voice to women. If you go back and you actually look at the early scholars at Penn State or at Cornell and so on, you had maybe 6 guys and 1 woman, one at best. And we weren't openly, there were a few of us, I'm sorry to say, who were openly misogynistic. Let's just get that on the table. But most of that, we just didn't see it. We didn't see it. And so I remember when at Cornell, when some of the sisters approached the faculty, and they were pretty pissed off. We were wondering, why are you so pissed? And that's one of the main things I deal in the book. I revisit the model vis-a-vis gender. So.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned this, but I just wonder if you wanted to expand a little bit about the power dimension that goes into what's said about Black people and Black identity.
Yeah, let me borrow a statement from a woman from Africa. And she says, Professor Cross, I didn't know I was Black until I came to the United States.
I've heard that, yeah.
I said, well, what do you mean? She says, well, I was African. And then here I learned that I was Black. Mm. And so the other, that's what we're battling with, is the other's when Trump said yesterday, suburban women, I saved your neighborhoods. What's he talking about? Okay, we're talking about creating these structures. There was a study done that showed that 75% of the time, white people are talking to white people about life. They very seldom go outside of there. And it's 65% for African Americans. That's still very high. And then when you add the spatial separation, that's why when deindustrialization hit Black communities and brown communities in the late 50s, we didn't think about it for the most part. We don't think of the Rust Belt as part of Harlem. And yet the fact of the matter is deindustrialization hit us first. And because of the spatial separation, it almost wasn't recognized. And then you had Moynihan. Moynihan is almost like a Dave Chappelle show. He sees that
that's
we're
an interesting parallel.
Well, look, he sees that we're unemployed, and yet he doesn't turn to the issue of, have we lost jobs? He turns to the family to say, oh, we have been raised to not take advantage of jobs. It's an absurdity, but that's what happened. And as a white scholar, he had the power he helped to fashion the whole Great Society. But notice, the Great Society did not address the issue of unemployment. We wanted to educate our children with Head Start. It wanted to do this, wanted to do that. And a lot of it was premised on deficits. We need to teach the parents and this and so on. Yet between 1945 and the mid-1950s, that's almost an unexplored period in history, in Black history, because we were so damn anchored. We were segregated, but our communities were buzzing because we had fucking money, for Christ's sake. We could afford things and we did things. And then the 60s are amazing because all hell is breaking loose. we are experiencing a depression within the Black community at the same time that the radical right is starting to produce dark money and privatizing the Republican Party. I mean, and we see where, in a sense, through the Federalist Society. I mean, anyway, and at the same time, King is being shot, and we're blows the top off of our head. So at the very same time that we have this positive assertion of Blackness that's happening for the most part amongst the bourgeois, okay, we have this horrible thing that is happening amongst salaried workers. And it happens and it confuses us. I can remember, except for Manning Marable, most of us didn't talk about political economy in Black studies. We were talking about I was talking about images, distortions, and whatever. And we missed Marable's notion. He said there were 5 categories of employment moving forward. And we are in the 3 bottom rung ones that are likely to disappear within a short time. And it happened. I feel like I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, but I want to just have one quick follow up on something you just said that I find intriguing. You mentioned that the sort of, it's like, if I understood it right, the sort of beginning of development of Black consciousness was happening within the bourgeoisie or the upper echelons of Black culture. Did I get that right? And
it's right. And I have to qualify because I was born to working class parents. Henry Louis Gates Jr. was born to working class parents. So most of the people who ended up staffing for the first realm of Black studies were people who were from working class. So in that sense, it kind of blinded us because the system was working. Negrescence produced social mobility, okay? And now as an 80-year-old, I'm feeding off of 3 sources of income for retirement, okay? Whereas my father had 1, and now most people have none. Because in a sense, what happened starting in the same time that Blackness was occurring, the radical right was pushing back against resources for the working class. So that's why I'm saying it's a crazy time. And I'm just now myself as a scholar able to disentangle them. So like the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
They've caused Mississippi to take the insignia off the flag, right? We've got the guy in Belgium who just gave an apology for Leopold's craziness in Africa and the raping and killing tens of thousands of Black. We have all these are good things. It's nice that some of those statues are gone in the South. Now Black people can get up in the morning, walk down to the center of town and not be reminded of white vengeance and hostility. Yet we have not produced any significant new jobs. Poor people are still stuck. In fact, we are discovering that our dilemma, even though we're trying to make this a race thing, let's have Black Lives Matter. Underneath it all, on the same day that Floyd died, scores of white people died deaths of despair. Suicide, alcoholism, and drug overdose. Because ironically, poor whites think they are responsible for their poverty. They don't look to the idea of the social safety net. They think that when we argue for the social safety net, we're coming from an unworthy poor position. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, let's explore this Black Lives Matter in a couple of ways. And I guess maybe one of the ways I'll pose to begin with is just from what you said, is the attention to Black Lives Matter and kind of the focus on if you will, awakening racial identity, is that going to get in the way of a deeper analysis that has more to do with economics? I mean, I'm really curious to know your take on kind of, in a sense, a number of different things. And so let me kind of throw them all out at once. I am really interested in the extent to which you think, I mean, you had mentioned that the negrescence theory has kind of come up during the period of the Black Power movement and was influenced by that. And I'm wondering if to a certain extent we're seeing a similar reawakening of Black consciousness within Black communities because of Black Lives Matter. Secondly, are we seeing any similar kind of awakening of consciousness of Black people within white society or their own selves? And then maybe the main question is, given all that's happening and the wokeness that's happening, is it going to persevere, or is it going to go by the wayside when the next big thing happens?
Am I allowed to first say, wow, okay, all those questions? Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
So in some ways, Black Lives Matter is a refinishing of old business. Black women were totally frustrated working with cisgender Black males who would use the rhetoric of community, but then when it came to praxis, they would leave out certain groups. That is to say, well, we don't mean women, we don't mean gays and lesbians, we surely don't mean transgender. So it's a powerful movement of bringing into the center and even making the encouraging the leadership of queer people who have often been totally invisible or in fact been denigrated. So that's one of the most powerful things that the movement is doing. It's also trying to bring to the forefront Black pain, sorrow, and trauma that is related to everyday life. It means to deal with racial capitalism, but for the most part, and I mean this with respect, it almost shows an ambivalence about it. It's not sure it wants to work with politicians, and we can understand why that may be the case. But how do you change laws? How do you, let's face it, if Donald Trump had, instead of passing his stupid tax thing, if he had done a 10-year infrastructure plan that would employ people who have less than a college degree, he would have been elected 3 times, not twice.
Okay, I'm gonna let that
go. I know, but it shows you how he starts out talking about the little guy, okay? And what I fear is that the elites are gonna cherry pick the Black Lives Matter agenda and give them some things, but make sure they don't get to the systemic issues. And the rhetoric of systemic is being tossed around, and I respect that. But right now, I don't see systemic changes on the agenda. And I think there's people who have millions of dollars to block that. I mean, we're living in a time when, in fact, I mean, our pain is real, and it's almost double, triple. It's racial, it's gender, and so on. But it's based in part upon our being unemployed. And I'm almost going to sound like a Black nationalist now. I would be more concerned in the next 10 years we find ways to employ people and have their health care taken care of, and then have their children have access to college education, even if we don't change residential segregation. Because we have a history that when we have the resources, our communities are vibrant. And then it turns out that, and you know this from your own personal life, when you are educated and then you enter these white spaces, then fine, then you negotiate the shit that they throw at us, okay? We try to tap into the human beings that we know whites are, but boy, they can be dogs when they're interacting with us. But that's not the job of the working class. They're gonna have a hell of a time, in a sense, with the white union leaders who still don't want them to become members of their unions. So I'm freaking out because we have a real opportunity here to make changes in the society. It will be changes that'll be made to white and Black working class people. It's a chance for us to make sure that people don't end up coming out of college with $35,000 worth of debt. It's a chance for us to have healthcare as a human right, not a privilege. And yet the other forces are really strong, man. And they are using race, and they're using gender, and they're using sexual orientation to block all this progress. And right now they're in control. If this nice white lady gets into the court, you know, I mean, I think she's going to end up participating in some decisions that are going to raise hell.
Yeah,
I hope somewhere in there I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And actually, speaking of questions, I haven't seen anything in the chat from our colleagues. I don't know if Helen, that means they're coming to you, but just wanted to make sure there's an opportunity to have folks in the audience also bring their thoughts into play here. But I just want to follow that a little bit further. Let's as you may well know, there's a chance, at least, that we're going to get a change of administration in Washington. And when
Very
Joe Biden,
change.
sorry,
very centrist change. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so here's the question. When Joe Biden calls calls Bill Cross and says, Bill, what would you have me do to improve the plight of Black people and also to bring our country together across racial and cultural lines? What's your advice to him? Is it the infrastructure program or
multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan that employs people without having to retrain them, take them as they are, and addition of healthcare, make that permanent. And then the third thing would be to find a way to bring down the cost of education, at least at the public institutions, and put some pressure on the prestigious institutions to do a better job of finding talent amongst the working class. Mm-hmm. And it has to be a 10-year thing. And we need to highlight the needs of the Native American community. There's just no reason why they shouldn't have clean running water. It's just ridiculous. Or access to the internet. Man, if we revitalized our infrastructure, by that I mean if we had access, if everybody, even if you lived in some small little town, access to the internet. We have clean water. I mean, think about it. Flint, Michigan, some of their children are damaged for their life because of the ingestion of lead. In 2020, mind you. If we had bridges that were not rusted out, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm driving, I think, I don't think I want to go over there.
Yeah.
Or let alone walk. That's the hope of it all. And that's where the Black Lives Matter and other movements are pushing us. And I don't see where if we get a new president, it's going to be interesting because his thing is to kind of hold back, be in the middle. That'll be better than what we've got. But he's going to have a chance of real change. And if we luck up and get a Democratic Congress, oh man, that's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. But we don't have to go crazy because the answers here are not mysterious. And then as to ourselves, I mean, I've tried to show in my work, we have the talent, the energy, the vitality, the agency, which when we have economic resources, because we're living in a society where money is important, okay? You can't be unemployed and poor and at the same time revitalize a community. The people who do that are nothing short of amazing, but most of us cannot. We're not Superman. We're not MLK. We're not Malcolm X. But when most of us have resources, what do we do with it? Our churches become alive. We become innovative with regard to our music. So I think that we already have kind of a latent capacity to respond, and what we need is resources, and we don't have those.
Well, let me then take a question from our colleagues that relates to that. One of our colleagues says, I've heard that an important function of racism is to prevent Black and others in the working class from joining together to fight for jobs and healthcare and reduction of students' loans, et cetera. So can infrastructure functions to help resolve this? In other words, if they build it, will we come together? Or is there still going to be, if I'm understanding the question correctly, or is there still going to be wedges that come between us as coming together as sort of a united working class or united working group to make progress together?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my original point about one of the contributions I try to make in the new book. Give me a large sample of any group. In this case, we're talking about Black people. And if you and I say up, someone in the audience is going to say down. So success in a general sense is not going to stop diversity of opinion. Okay. I don't understand when I see him, this guy who's president now, giving his speeches.
He would not be named, yeah.
Yeah, and I see people in the audience who are Black, who are cheering him.
Yeah.
This has got to be a Dave Chappelle show. Okay? Got to be.
Yeah.
But it's not. And the one thing I've learned, and I started out a Black romantic. Okay, I mean that's the Gressons has a lot of romanticism in it. Okay, you will feel better. You will do better. You will do. I mean that's partially true. Okay, we started Black Studies. We have poets. We have writers that came out of that energizing thing. But we can't forget that as humans, we are diverse. I remind people in the book, the song Tenderly, if sung by Louis Armstrong, is going to be different from Sarah Vaughan.
Mm-hmm.
And so we bring that sense, if I'm born in Mississippi as opposed to Wyoming and so on, and I sing that, I'm going to bring a different style. And so in answer to your question, we can have reasonable revitalization in our communities, and we can't escape diversity of political opinion. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then when you add to that the dark money that's being poured into communities to promote contrived diversity, all the more so you should expect it.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, it's really, right now one can make the case, I know this sounds crazy, that the Republican Party has allowed itself to become privatized at almost all levels.
That didn't quite sound crazy to me, but I hear you saying, yeah.
And it's probably spilled over to some extent to the Democratic Party, but there's a way, we've allowed certain people to get so much money that it's chump change for them to give millions of dollars to certain kinds of political entities. And they still have this big chunk. It's out of whack. It's out of whack.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just go back to your own background for a second, because I'm really curious as to, and we have a colleague who's asking a similar question.
Yeah.
Who, as a psychologist or as just a thinker growing up, and in the profession, who are your role models? Who influenced your thought, and who continues to influence your thinking?
Yeah. The first was W.E.B. Du Bois. Mm-hmm. When I was going through my own regressance, I don't know how it happened, but I came upon Black Reconstruction, and I would travel to work on the L and read the chapters, and so Du Bois starts out with the notion of our agency, and that really infected me. So it was a dead man who did that. Then later on, the late Harriet McAdoo and her husband, John McAdoo from Howard University. I've already mentioned, well, you and I mentioned Wade Boykin, who was a psychologist at Howard. James Turner played a prominent role in, if you will, painting my consciousness Black. More recently, Raylan Rabaka, the phenomenal scholar at University of Colorado. The son of a bitch is 45 and has got 11 books. Geez, I can't even catch up with 11 books. Somehow he writes in his sleep. He and I, we are very, very close. Michelle Fine at the City University of New York.
I know Michelle, yeah.
She's like a sister, and I mentioned her and dedicate the book in part. And then Helen Neville of the University of Illinois and her fantastic partner, Chachu, whose last name I'm blocking on. And then off the intellectual side, and of course my daughter and my former wife, and all my relatives. And then there are these people who you experienced in a different way. So Miles Davis, Miles is in my soul. I could name musicians who, if they didn't exist, I don't know how I could exist. Those are some.
Yeah.
And then there are the students. We have listening on now, McKenzie, the graduate student here at DU. She's almost awakened me to my old father stuff. She just had a child, and I love it when she sends me pictures. Shayla Haynes at the University of Texas, Texas A&M, also just had a baby and sharing with me. The students have kept me grounded. I go crazy. I'm going crazy now. I can be a powerful force. I understand that. But they've always found ways when I've calmed down to tell me something.
Good, yeah. Yeah.
They'll wait till my blood pressure is. Have you thought about this? And I thought I would miss teaching, but when I was about 76, I said, okay, you don't know how much more time. And the book is my thank you to the Black community. My being a part of Black studies, my being a part of the Black community. I'm a very shy person. I in a social setting, I run to the back of the room with cookies and cream and whatever.
And Miles.
But I feel very dynamic in certain academic settings. But I am so thankful for the life I have led, in part because of the Black community having trusted me. And I've not always said things that they wanted to hear. The book is going to piss off some people. I don't hold back. But I felt a moral obligation to be truthful, to be transparent, and ultimately to say thank you.
Speaking of the next generation of scholars, what are the key questions that you would hope would still be focused on in terms of research? I mean, what are the new intellectual frontiers that you think need to be explored?
You know, there's a tendency in psychology to have paper, pencil, this and that, and quickie, get your PhD and whatever. I would hope more students would do daily diary studies where they follow people around in their daily activities to see the connection between the identity that people espouse and how they exhibit that identity in daily life. You know, what becomes their priorities and so on. I would be happy that if there was never another study on Black identity and self-esteem. I'd be totally.
Why is that? Why is
that?
Oh,
because it assumes that there's something new to find. The issue is not our self-esteem, it's our opportunities to show our talents. We can't. I was given a choice. I came out of Princeton, right? I could have gone into psychology, and then thank goodness, James Turner pulled me into Cornell for African-American studies. When you have a playground in which to exhibit your talent, it's fabulous. But if you're good at something and you have high self-esteem and then no one's giving you an opportunity, man, that's when you become suicidal, for God's sake. Because as adults and living in a capitalist society, we get so much identity out of what we do. My brother, you know, before I knew I might become bourgeois, I thought I was going to be in the back of a garbage truck or delivering mail, because I had a brother-in-law who was like my second father. Sam Adams is his name. He would go to work on the CTA in his brown outfit. Then he'd come home and he would drive home in a beautiful car, always washed, always smelling new. He'd go into his room, and then when he came out, he was dressed to the nines. I mean, that was my image of success. I thought that's what I was going to go to. And the idea of the movement, first transforming my mind, okay, and letting me see things I hadn't seen before. And then working, when you're in Black studies, it's an interdisciplinary experience. People in sociology, and drama, and so on, and it affects you. You no longer think of yourself as just a psychologist. There are times when I miss psychology, other times I don't, because it's a very closed, narrow field. It has a way, ironically, psychology has a way of dehumanizing while it's trying to humanize. So I'm rambling again. Anyway, so that's where I'm at today about these
Got things. It. Yeah. One of our colleagues picked up on a phrase you used and wanted to ask a little bit more about this. The question is, what do you mean by contrived diversity? Did we hear you say that correctly? Contrived diversity? Was that a term you used?
I can't remember that one.
Okay, maybe we misheard that one. Well, then let me just.
I know what it makes me think about.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
You can, well, this is coming out of higher education. Higher ed is one of the best places for diversity, if you mean by that, all the bodies are in the room, and in some instances, listening to each other. But then after they graduate, it's almost as though that all had no meaning. You know, it's a, wait a minute, I'm as qualified as this person, and so on. And real diversity has to take place, if ideally, at K through 12, higher ed, and then in the real world in terms of employment. And that's still a struggle. That's still a struggle.
Yeah. You mentioned schools, and my own work is in education, and I'm really curious to get your thoughts about schools and sort of other socializing institutions, churches, even parents. What can or do these socializing institutions do to foster positive Black identity, and what do they do and shouldn't do? I mean, what if you could sort of an advice sheet for parents or schools, what's important to do, what's important not to do?
There's two things going on with development, and they sometimes get confused. There's helping kids to have agency, to overcome their shyness, to develop their skills. I mean, that's what I put that under the term interpersonal competence. Okay. Others would say personality. And so the experiences in the church, the singing, joining of groups, and so on, you're helping the kid to develop interpersonal tools in which to transact what? And that's where identity comes in play. Identity is, what is it that you're going to transact? What is it that you have meaning in? So the church, schools, and so on, and this is a hard job for the schools because they're very midline. To tell the truth about the Black experience means, how do I talk about pain without traumatizing the kid, okay? And at the same time, how do I get the white kid to take ownership of the fact that 450 people were lynched without them, going to apoplexy? I mean, education is a trip with regard to how you get at the truth. Think about it. In Germany, we don't have statues of Hitler. We don't have statues of Hitler's generals. In their school system, they are taught to take ownership of the Holocaust. Are you with me?
Yeah.
In the South, we celebrate people who were treasonous. They tried to destroy the United States. And in fact, when you study slave owners, they thought poor people should not vote. I find it ironic that poor white people celebrate if they understood the owners didn't want them to vote. And in fact, they created vagrancy laws to arrest landless poor whites because they didn't know what else to do with them. We end up celebrating people who, in fact, tried to destroy us. And we racialize that, and therefore that's where we end up weaponizing race, so that we have a president who says, oh, that's our history. Oh, that is absolutely amazing. We turned it upside down.
Another question from our colleagues, moving around a little bit. It says you spent a number of Ivy League, you spent a lot of time in a number of Ivy League and elite institutions in education. What's their role now in ensuring equity and justice?
In education, the Ivy League is power. People will do or not do. Like, for example, recently the president said, no more training on diversity.
Yeah, I wanted to get your take on that too, but go ahead.
You want to hope that industry, mainstream industry, and higher education, especially the Ivies, reject that and continue with the emphasis. Now, we do it through having women's studies, Black studies, and so on. But people run those institutions and they have all these implicit biases and so on. They need the training. In some cases, when they go home to their segregated environment, they have no place to express. It's almost as though the campus allows everyone to kind of be released from the crap that is back home and to be more honest and trustworthy. I am competent because some white people took interest in me along with Black people. If those white people had been openly hostile, I don't know where I'd be. I had strength and so on. So there's no getting around it. Successful Black people have white allies. We have to figure out a way to enter those white spaces. We need as many white people as you can to get over their problems. And I'm hoping that, as I said, the Ivies continue to show leadership. I love it when I see Henry Louis Gates and his program, Finding Our Roots. And he's being allowed to do that, obviously, by the institution. It's a fantastic show.
Good, yeah. We were talking about Black Lives Matter earlier, and I'm sorry I'm skipping around here, but these things are really fascinating to me.
You're the moderator, you're getting all the questions.
Yeah, but no, I am curious though about you know, what is your take on kind of what happened to the Black consciousness movement in the 70s, you know, whether or not it petered out or how it transmogrified or was it resisted? And is that likely to happen with Black Lives Matter? And I'm particularly interested in your thinking about kind of, is there resistance coming that needs to be considered now?
Now, remember I said, we have underestimated the way in which working class children, like myself, through the movement, were given an avenue toward higher education. Okay, so in a sense, what stopped that? Deindustrialization. In a sense, we stopped positioning bright Bill Crosses and so on to the point where they could be in school and then take advantage of the opportunities. That slowed it. Our biggest problem in the Black community is not our talents. It's the absence of our participating in the economy. And then being even worse, because we do things on the street, we get labeled, we get in prison, and then we can't vote for 3,000 years. The movement, I explained this in the book. We didn't know, but the movement was undercut by deindustrialization. The system stopped the treadmill of people starting out in the working class, being given opportunities in schools, and the next thing you know, craziness happens. They become poets, they become Black psychologists, and so on.
Yeah. So
right now, we are. Think about it. I wish that on the news broadcast they would talk about the stock market. They talk about unemployment. Then they break it down to people who have a college degree and those who don't. In other words, speak to what's happening in inner city communities. Well, we don't. We don't realize what 26% of unemployment looks like. It looks like blight. It looks like, and then add to that when you get sick, you can't get well because you have no health. I mean, really let that sink in. And those are the things that Black Lives Matter is both trying to fight against, but they're struggling with. Those forces are causing people. It's kind of hard to get up and march when you're hungry.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what you mentioned. Yeah.
When you see your kid hungry and you feel like you don't have the ability to provide them with food.
So it goes back to that.
I don't care what your identity is. You can have your shit all together, but if you as an adult can't show your children how they can be safe and so on. The whole thing with the hurricane coming through, 2 or 3 times now people have had to move and they've lost their homes. So it becomes very immediate. That becomes what's in front of you. So
yeah. Well, this has been really fascinating, and I want to close by really allowing you to have the last word. And you mentioned you might want to read a few passages from the book. I think we would all love to first for you to give us again the title of the book that's coming out, when it's going to be published, by whom, and then if you wanted to finish with some portion of it, that would be terrific.
Yeah, the book borrows back to a childhood memory. I was the first boy born after 3 girls, and you can imagine what that was like. Okay, and so my sisters used to take me to the barber shop, which for me as a kid, it was a real event. You'd walk into this long, narrow place, and I noticed how every time an adult would come in, somebody in the barber shop knew the name of that person.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And knew their nickname, okay. And I remember as a child, I used to wonder, what nickname are they gonna give me as an adult? Well, my memory coming out of that, these guys sometimes were characters, but I didn't see them as pathological. And so the title of my book is Black Identity Viewed from a Barber's Chair. That brings back all those memory of the men.
Published, I think you said next year, June.
I started to say don't be till June until 2021. I'm working really hard to stay alive.
You'll be fine.
Well, that's what I'm hoping. I'm doing 5 miles a day, 2 miles in the morning, 2 in the evening, and 1 at noon.
Wow, that's You'll be fine. Trust me.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
why. It's a big deal for me to be there when the book is published and see how people respond. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can see that. I think you said, is it Temple University Press?
Temple University Press.
Okay, great.
Therefore, it will be expensive. Okay.
Well,
Well,
we'll save it for now.
So
But go ahead, you wanted to find
first,
yeah.
thank you for those who are tuning in. I want to end with what essentially is the last page of the book. And there's a point I might break down. Let's hope I don't. Okay. Thus, I leave you with this summary. In order to fully comprehend the agency, motivation, interpersonal competence, thirst for knowledge, and material success exhibited by former slaves within the first 12 years following emancipation, we need to construct a new psychological paradigm. Most importantly, we need to keep in mind that their personalities, pro-social attitudes, and general psychological competence all resulted from the way they were raised as children in slavery at the hands of human beings who were themselves slaves. This means the dehumanizing schemes of the elites were not as effective as originally designed, despite overwhelming historical evidence confirming the intent of slave owners was to fashion hell on earth. Thus, we need to decouple intent from consequence. For humans who spent infancy through childhood in slavery to subsequently display remarkable success as freedmen and freedwomen when they reach 20, 30, or 40 years of age is historical evidence that something profoundly human happened to them as children when the slave community shaped their self-concepts and informed their worldviews. Discovering the humanity of the enslaved is not romanticism. It is comprehension of how humanity expresses itself, even under the most restrictive, punishing, and heinous condition. It links us to the ways Jews in Nazi concentration camps coveted musical instruments and before death held concerts for the doomed. It is to understand how Black men and women in the present survived years of solitary confinement. It is how World War II Korean comfort women lived to tell their stories. It is to comprehend the origins of Martin Luther King Jr.'s remarkable letter from Birmingham jail. It is how Nelson Mandela walked out of prison with his humanity intact. We are birds that sing while caged. Thank you.
That's beautiful. Dr. Cross, thank you so much. This has been an extraordinary opportunity for me and for all of us listening to hear the words of wisdom from someone who is indeed wise. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. And to all our folks listening, thank you so much for being part of us.
I see faces, Mary Pat. I see Mackenzie. Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye, all.